Hello there. I thought I'd do a shortish video about this very interesting situation in the game Sisu, the battles for Suursaari Island in 1942 and 1944. It's by Red Sash Games. This is a print and play version, and excuse me, I've got a bit of broken plexi there. You can have a game made for you and sent to you. So this is the winter map. This is the 1942 scenario, where the island is held by the Soviets, so it's between the Soviet and Finnish territory. It's actually a Finnish island. Soviets took it, and the Finns came in the middle of the night, and in the battle throughout the whole day, they managed to take they came across on the frozen ice and managed to take the island back from the Soviets. In 1944, the Finns now holding the island, but then the Germans attacked and tried to take it from them. And for that scenario, you have German naval landing displays, so you have a different set of counters, you have some naval units. This you have a different map, so it's the same island, exactly the same features, except it's coloured in like summer terrain colours, and this is not now ice, but this is water. You have here a turn track, so this scenario, each turn is, both of them, each turn is an hour long, but this one starts at 4 o'clock at night. There's a couple of twilight turns, and you get a snowstorm. Will continue up to the 9 o'clock turn. After that, you'll start rolling on a 6 on a d6. It's going to clear. Once it's cleared, if any Finns are left on the ice, then the Soviet artillery will be, with the snowstorm, there's 2 hex line of sight. After that, any Finns left in the ice could be seen immediately by the Soviets and bombarded by their artillery. Also, after the snowstorm clears, there's a chance of airstrikes coming in for, at least for the Finns, I believe, also for the Soviets. I didn't manage it for them in my last game. You have off-map holding boxes, so the Finns have artillery here and here, so they're also able to call that in. This is a kilometre, 1,000 metres, so 1,000, each hex is about 300, that's a kilometre, each hex is about 300 metres. The battle is for victory points, so there's at 9 o'clock, at 2 o'clock and at 7 o'clock you can check for victory, and then finally at 1 in the next day, in the middle of the night, for the final turn. If the Finns have 6 victory points at 9, 11 at 2, and 16 at 7, and 19 at the last turn, then they win the game. So potentially the game could be over on your 6th turn. The victory points are here. There's a village here, so that's 1 victory point. There's a village here, that's another victory point. There's a village and a lighthouse here. Then there's 3 victory points here in the main Suursaari, the main kind of like harbour and town. There's also here, there's 2 victory points, some more conurbation here. And then there's 1, 2 and 3 high points. So these are the highest peaks on the mountain. They're also victory points. So in that there's what, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 11 victory points geographical. But then the Finns, and it's only the Finns get victory points, they can get victory point for every 3 Soviet unit which they managed to eliminate. Yes, I cut these badly. These should all be the same size. And so the Finns need to move quickly if they're going to win by 6 o'clock, at 9 o'clock, with those 6 victory points. For example, if they took the 3 hexes there, 2 there, and the peak here, so they held all that part of the island, they would have it. But that's a tall order, what with low visibility and slower movement in the snow, and the Soviets nearly all of them are in emplacements at the start. So that's the general situation. It is an interesting situation, what with the artillery that's available, the spotting that occurs. So my little markers here indicate that there's a spotting unit there who is engaged in spotting at the moment for one of the off-board, or there's also onboard artillery they can spot for as well, although the artillery can fire under their own line of sight if they have it. So and that spotting occurs the turn after you sort of activate it, so you have to record it, and of course your enemy might have moved away out of line of sight by then, so that's an interesting wrinkle. But I think the biggest sort of interesting thing I like in this, it involves this track here, which involves the victory points, but also fatigue. So each side has a fatigue marker, and the Finns start with the initiative. Each time you finish your turn with initiative, you add a point of fatigue. The Finns start with 2 and the Soviets with 4. So after the first turn, the Finns will go up to 3. After the next turn, and they will retain initiative until they roll for a rest. When you reach fatigue of 4, you at the end of the turn, at the beginning of the turn when you check for initiative, you will rest on a die roll of 1 or 2. If you reach fatigue 8, it's on a die roll of 1 or 4, and if you reach fatigue 12, it's automatic. But what that means is that the Finns always have initiative, so they go first in every turn, until that they hit a rest. And when you hit a rest, all your forces kind of freeze. Any artillery strikes you had called in the turn before are still operative. But you cannot attack. You can only move if you move further away from the enemy. And then at the end of that turn, you recover 2 fatigue. So if, say, on the 4th turn, the Finns... on the 2nd turn, the Finns had 4 fatigue and they were forced into a rest on the 5th turn, then they would go down to 2 fatigue, and they could... you can automatically take yourself out of a rest after... doing it for 1 turn, but then the initiative has gone over to the other side. So I've not explained that very well, but the point is, when you rest, you start losing fatigue, but you've handed over initiative to the other side. So at that point, the Soviets would have the initiative. They would be gaining fatigue. The Finns would not, whether they're resting or not. Whoever doesn't have initiative does not gain fatigue. So the initiative side is kind of pressing the attack, gaining fatigue, and then at a certain point they're going to be forced into a rest for 1 turn at least. So a brief pause, regroup, regather their wits, and then that passes the initiative to the other side. Now you can stay and rest if you want. You have to do it for that 1 turn. You can stay in it for longer if you want, so you're recovering more fatigue. So that means that when your opponent is then forced into a rest, you're likely to hold that initiative for longer. So it makes for an interesting situation, unlike sort of normal handling of initiative, where it just goes back and forth between one side and the other on a die roll, or it's kind of set and it's sort of like this turns for this side goes first, this side goes second. So what I found, this is my second game, and in the first game I found the Finns were pushing because they wanted to try and get the victory point so that they can get the victory in the bag, and they were close to victory on the 2 p.m. turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 11 turns into the game. So I think that's about halfway. I think it was 22 turns at total on this scenario. But then they because they'd been sort of pushing, they were forced into a rest, and that gave the Soviets chance then to kind of... The thing is, because it's quite a thin area, and the Soviets are spread out mostly around the perimeter, particularly mostly on one side, and because the Finns come in quite spread out, what they're trying to do in this situation is to kind of cut the island there, and then they want to sort of roll up the Soviets there whilst not worrying about those. So they're sort of trying to cut the enemy, defeat them in detail. because it's a thin island, it's quite easy to do that. The Finns are coming on both sides. But with that forced rest, it meant that then the Soviets were able to sort of move and bring themselves out of that pocket that was forming that slice and dice of their unity. So it was very interesting, very simply formed procedure that gave this good sense to the game, and that the Finns were on the roll, and then they were just close to clinching it, but then they finally had to, through fatigue, they had to rest and regroup for an hour. And you can imagine that's often going to be a problem in operations like this. So then the Soviets had the initiative, and the tempo changed, and that leads me to the next interesting thing. I'll give you a quick look. So here you've got some of the aids. So this is the combat results. You've got others here, terrain effects charts, but here's the combat results table. And sorry about the terrible lighting, it makes it a bit blurry. You've got DF at the top there, IF, CC, and what's that? NG, naval gunfire. So that doesn't come in this turn, but this scenario. But the DF is direct fire. The IF is indirect fire, so that's the artillery. The CC is close combat. In the direct fire, you're rolling 2 dice, and on a 7 and up, the enemy is checking for suppression, and on a 12 or higher, they are eliminated. That's only ever the top unit of a stack. You can maybe have 2-3 units in a stack. But the thing is that is very interesting in this is there's a reaction fire, which is not so unusual in sort of tactical-ish games like this. So whereby if a Finnish unit, say, moves next, as the one with initiative moves next, moves adjacent to, say, a Soviet unit tries to roll under their cohesion, which for the Soviets is 4 or 3 when they're suppressed. If they manage that, then they get to roll a slightly less than normal effective direct fire attack at the enemy. The enemy can spend an extra movement point to infiltrate, and then that isn't an opportunity. So there is that, which is not that unusual. But the most unusual thing is, say, combat's a function of movement. So the Finns say he's got 9 movement points. He spends 3 movement points to move into a coastal hex, 4 to move in these closer hexes inside. It's like wooded, snowy, wooded, swampy, hilly terrain, and cliffs marked here in brown. I highlighted those a bit more than they were on the original, and slopes and green hex sides are more expensive to cross, the steep slopes, cliffs. But anyway, so he's got 9 movement points. Say he spends 3 to move into this coastal terrain. He's got 6 left. Okay, he'd normally have less with the blizzard going on. But he's got 6 left. Now he can spend one of those for an attack. If he only spends 1, it's not so effective. He can spend up to 3 movement points on a direct fire attack and gain a bonus. But it's not just the Finn that rolls. If the Finn initiates a direct fire attack against this unit also has a roll on that direct fire table. So every time you're engaging an enemy unit, they are firing back at you, and they also get a roll. And it's quite an interesting, you have a little sub roll within that just to check who actually gets to implement their results first. So as the Finns, you might be attacking, and whether or not your enemy was alert enough to engage you in reaction fire as you moved closer. And that's only adjacent. You might be engaging the enemy from, say, 2 hexes away, in which case they wouldn't have no chance of that reaction fire. But anyway, no matter how far away you're engaging, if they have the range, they are firing back at you as well. And potentially, on a 1 or 2, the target gets to implement their results first. So normally the attacker is going to implement their results first. So say I suppress the Soviet unit, then when the Soviet roll will take the suppression into account and be slightly less effective. but vice versa. So on a 1 or 2, you're moving into attack, and your target might actually get an attack in on you before you can implement your result, and sometimes you can get eliminated before you can successfully clinch that attack which you were performing. So it's a very nice thing, and because it's mostly suppressions, not often eliminations, and you can recover from suppression with a rally at the end of your turn, it means that there's not there's a lot of gunfire going on, and units kind of try to maneuver to support each other, because as if you have more units firing together, they gain bonuses. But then there's the storm, or it's twilight, that's giving minuses. If you're firing extra range, that's a minus, etc. Things like that. So there's a lot of gunfire going on, sort of suppressions and occasional eliminations. Because at first I was worried that, okay, so I'm firing at my enemy and he's also firing at me as well. Maybe that everything's going to get eliminated quite quickly. It doesn't happen, but you do find that there's you have running gun battles, and then units trying to extricate themselves from a difficult situation. Other units coming from further away to try and join in to help out, or you're an officer moving up with a spotting capability to try and bring some air fire down on your opponent, some artillery fire to suppress it before so that when you roll for your direct fire attack, your enemy's already suppressed, you have a better chance of eliminating them. So it makes for a very nice tactical combat system, and it's quite simple and clean. There's 15 pages of rules in the rule book. There's a page or two for setup, and then there's about 4 or 5 pages for the other scenario with the naval rules, which I haven't delved into yet. So it's all quite not too complicated, quite clean. I have some rules questions. There are some unclarities in the rules. I'm waiting for answer on Consim World 4. They're not killers. I've been playing the game happily without, but they will affect outcomes once I know the answer to them. But you can make a judgment either way. It's essentially the combat results table and the rules contradict themselves on that you are suppressed if you roll above your cohesion or above and equal to your cohesion. So you can see it can make a big difference, but it obviously makes a big difference for both sides equally. So I'm hoping it's not favouring one or the other at the moment, not to have a full clarity on that point. Yeah, so it's a good game. It's interesting. It's from lesser known publisher, and I'm playing this as a little taster. Well, over the Christmas and New Year period, it's been a bit difficult to play the bigger red Sash game, Charlie's Year, that I'm already involved in. That's a bigger time and energy kind of commitment, mustering and mastering all those forces. So I've been playing this as a kind of lighter, more fun, light fun game, less commitment. Less deep satisfaction, but a very interesting game nevertheless, and an interesting take with this different system. I think that's about all I should say now. This isn't meant to be a full ins and outs of the system, but I just kind of like to highlight this as an interesting tactical system and an interesting battle, in case anyone would be interested in either of those things. There you go.